It shows us that we should put political correctness aside and realize that it is important to have police in the communities, to be using sources, to be using informers. And let's face it, the threat is coming from, for the most part, it's coming out of the Muslim community. It's a small percentage, but that's where it's coming from.
Congressman Peter King of New York on the Fox News channel yesterday advocating increased surveillance of American Muslims in order to protect our homeland. Peter King joins me now. Good morning, Pete. And also yesterday, you went a little further on our own Steve Malzberg show here on Newsmax TV. You specifically spoke about surveillance inside American mosques. Now, how do you square that with those who'd say, wait a minute, aren't there First Amendment concerns about the free exercise of religion?
I don't see that being any type of constitutional violation, because you're not preventing people from practicing their religion. And I wouldn't say be going into all mosques, but if you have reason to believe that people in a certain mosque are carrying out or intending to carry out an attack, or there's been suspicious activities, then I think the police have an obligation, either themselves or to have an informer for them in that mosque. For instance, the first World Trade Center attack in New York in 1993 was planned entirely out of a mosque in Jersey City, in Jersey. And that's where it was planned, that's where the blind sheik was. So I'm saying that we can't be saying something is off limits or out of bounds if, as a result of that, you're going to have potentially hundreds of Americans being killed.
But again, the distinction is this does not inhibit the free exercise of religion. It simply would have surveillance inside a service.
Says regarding religion can be used against them. You're not stopping anyone from practicing their religion. But if you believe that that mosque or church or synagogue is being used to plan criminal activity, then yes, I believe that law enforcement not just has the right, but has the obligation to follow it there. And I think we get too caught up in political correctness, and we somehow lose sight of the fact that the threat is coming. This terror threat is coming from entirely within the Muslim American community. 99%, 98%, whatever the number is, of Muslims are good Americans. They're same with Italians, with the mafia, and the Irish with the Westies gang in New York, which was a gang of brutal killers. But the fact is, the threats were coming from those communities. As Rudy Giuliani said yesterday, when he was going after the mafia, he looked in the Italian American community. That's where it was coming from. And so this is an issue we've gotten diverted on, and this, whether it's the New York Times or Associated Press or the so-called civil libertarians, it's really tying the hands of the police and prevents them from getting the job done. To me, the best or the worst example of this type of abuse by the media was what was done to the NYPD. They did such a phenomenal job in New York City, and then the Times and the Associated Press and other elements of the media just constantly attacked them and berated them. So, in any event, I stand by what I said.
Fair enough, Pete. We appreciate you going a little further in depth with what you mean and the type of surveillance that you believe could be conducted. Now, in the wake of yesterday's terror attack in France, a lot of people still throwing around the lone wolf or lone rat label. Is there really such a thing, considering that there would probably have to be some collusion, some sort of association, or is lone wolf a distinction that we are using to make ourselves feel more secure here at home?
Yeah, I think the term lone wolf, it's used to somehow suggest that there's not a large effort, there's just a few crazy people here or there. And yeah, there are going to be so-called lone wolves who act on their own. But yesterday's attack in France, that was a concerted, well-coordinated effort. And these people had, to me, is obvious they had military experience. They had planning and plotting and maneuvering. And so whether it's the individual psycho who is always going to be there, or it's going to be these well-trained units like yesterday, the fact is we have threats coming from radical Islam. But yesterday's, to me, under no way could that attack be categorized as lone wolf. That was a well-coordinated effort.
Pete, as you know, funding for the Department of Homeland Security is to be determined next month. That's the deadline. Now, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Jade Johnson, had a couple of comments in that regard.
There are things that need to be funded in the Homeland Security Department new starts, new funding for border security, counterterrorism, the Secret Service that cannot wait much longer. I cannot continue to operate on a continuing resolution. For the homeland security of this nation, we need an appropriations bill, and we need it soon.
Pete, immigration and border security is part of homeland security. Are you satisfied that this secretary and this president are doing all they can to secure our borders and adequately administer what we now call homeland security?
No, I mean, there's real distinctions here. The Department of Homeland Security is made up of 22 former departments and agencies who merged into one. And I have a lot of respect for Jay Johnson, but the Obama administration overall has not done the job on border security. And what we have to do, and also the president's amnesty order last year is what's really put this to a head. Well, I guess it was 2 months ago now, right after Election Day. And what we have to do is find a way to target funding and stop funding which the president would need to implement the executive order, but still allow real homeland security procedures to go forward and programs to go forward. I mean, many of those programs are essential, including funding for various programs, certain border patrol, et cetera, So we have to find a way to enable the department to carry out its mandate to protect us from terrorism, protect us from attacks, and secure the borders. At the same time, though, find whatever way we can to restrict the president from implementing that executive order. It's going to be a tough one. I'm not on the Appropriations Committee. I hope they can find a way to do it because the president can't be allowed to get away with this. On the other hand, I don't want to put the security of the country at risk by cutting out funding which goes into counterterrorism efforts.
In the 30 seconds that remain, Pete, maybe this is just an honest disagreement among friends, but Jay Johnson, as I understand it, he was the guy who came up with the spin workplace violence when he was at the Pentagon dealing with the Fort Hood massacre. You still believe he can serve effectively as Homeland Security Secretary?
Yeah, I've had a number of meetings with him. I also know that, for instance, he was the person who was approving drone attacks in the Pentagon. And again, the workplace violence issue, I've not discussed that with him, whether he was the one who originated or not, that expression or not. I know there was a terrible definition, believe me. But again, in my experience with him as secretary, when I deal with him on homeland security issues, counterterrorism, I find him to be very strong.
Fair enough. Peter King, Congressman from the state of New York, former chair of the Homeland Security Committee, we thank you for your time, and America's Forum will continue following this Newsmax Now update.